Okay.
I did send an email. I copied you on it.
Hey, everybody, we're ready to get started. We have Valerie on the phone. So it looks like we're short on what, Vanessa, DJ, and Kurt? No, Kurt was down there. DJ, Vanessa, and Rob at the moment. But let's go ahead and get started. So we have a Land and Buildings Urban Renewal Agency project. Prioritization update.
Mayor, do we have a slide deck for this printed?
I don't see one.
Yes, for the urban renewal. I have one on my desk. Do you guys have what looks like here, Lands and Building Urban Renewal Agency prioritization?
I only have Caveman Plaza.
We'll get you one.
Well, it looks like Joel has one.
Yeah, it was mailed to us. Yeah. And actually, it's this one right here. It's this one. It's not, the title's a little bit.
I can give you mine if you don't want to have one.
I don't have one either.
I got 2 copies. I brought the one from home. Oh, you did?
Smells so pretty, I think.
You may just give her.
What do you need one?
Can you just give her this one?
Oh, I have this one, so just burn it.
Okay, so Kurt does have the LB projects for today? Okay. Does it look like the one on the screen? All right, we'll just wait a few minutes. I guess Karen's going to break some down.
Mayor, this is Adam. I know they've definitely been printed. I apologize that they're not ready to go there at the moment.
Oh, yeah, it's this one.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. We don't have them on the table here.
Mayor, would you like us to just move forward with the task force presentation while the others being printed and provided on the dais?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, good morning. Brad Clark, Community Development Department. I'm going to just hit a few of these slides. I think mostly we're just trying to provide the council with the framework for your discussion, since I think you're all pretty familiar with where we're at on this. The subject in summary is to have a discussion about the status and potential repurposing of the Caveman Plaza Task Force, and there's 2 main goals there that it relates to for your strategic plan. I just wanted to include just a reminder what the original task force purpose was here, to establish that group of citizens to identify barriers to overcome solutions for the Caveman Plaza property. So that the original task force was specific to that piece of property there on G Street. It was set up as a limited task force for, you appointed 9 members. 6 to 8 months was the original appointment term. And we had a pretty good diverse group of folks there that are appointed to that commission, to that task force. This is just some background. December 15th, 2021, the resolution was adopted. Then the volunteer openings were open for 3 weeks, and then 14 applications submitted in February, and then the 9 individuals that you appointed are there at the bottom of that slide, slide number 4. And around that early February time, we started communications with Sarah Design, who presented to you prior to just have a more specific scope of work and what that would look like. A few weeks later, they notified us that they would need to delay because 2 of their key staff people at Sarah had left, and they were 2 people that were assigned to our project. So they said, can we start in June? Overlapping with that was also conversations with Travis Boersma, representing the property owner there, with Aaron, city manager, and Travis informed the city that he had made a decision to retain ownership of the plaza and focus on investing in the current site. And that property owner remains committed to supporting the Grants Pass community in meaningful ways. That was from an email that we received from Travis. So that kind of leaves us with this commission, or this task force, I'm sorry, that hasn't met yet, and yet is ready to do some work on behalf of the city. And what do you want to do with that group of folks? Listed on the slide here are 4 ideas of potentially repurposing the task force. The council had heard about 1.5 years ago from Jim Love. He is the principal with Terrain Architecture, Terrain Landscape Architecture, and was the lead architect in looking at some landscape improvements, some plaza improvements, some street tree improvements to the downtown core area. You received a presentation, a summary of his plan, of Terrain Architect's plan, that contains some of those ideas. And at this point, we have not moved forward with any of those. So there's been some discussion at Historical Building and Sites Commission, some discussion at the tourism, but there really hasn't been any other forward movement on that. So one idea is to task this group with looking at that. Really, these all could potentially overlap or be handled individually. The second bullet, evaluate the public survey results and potential next steps for the Southwest G Street reconfiguration. As you know, we had a pretty good response to the survey that was sent out on that G Street survey, and there was general support for the idea, although there were a number of people that had concerns about proceeding with that. So what does that look like? How could it potentially impact downtown uses? That survey was not related to use of property. It was only really the right-of-way and potentially, going to that one-way traffic movement with a 14-foot wide sidewalk and the diagonal parking. So how would that relate to not just G Street, but the other adjacent blocks of downtown? The third one there, review work completed to date by Thornton Engineering for the downtown lighting project. This has been in the council's strategic plan for a couple of years. Some work on the lighting was done, but still quite a bit in the design stage, so this may be a good opportunity to sort of step back and make sure that everyone's on the same page with that original scope. Thornton Engineering is, of course, available to explain the work that they've done to date and Again, how that could relate to the plaza concept that was presented in Terrain Architect's plan. So the lighting piece is out there, and then fourth, the feasibility and timing of the Urban Renewal Agency, the funding and partnerships there. As you know, there's several projects related to downtown, both privately driven as well as potentially city-driven projects that are in the Urban Renewal Plan. Those could be another area of focus for the task force. Cost implication, at this point, no money has been spent on this project, but the council did authorize us to proceed with Sarah Design. Their numbers are there on the screen. $25,000 was their quote for basically facilitating the task force, having 2 meetings in person and then a couple of remote meetings. $8,000 was the additional service for their more detailed visualizations that are very specific to that plaza project. Again, no subsequent conversations have taken place about what would that look like if we expanded the geographic scope of the task force. At this point, we just let them know that the City Council is considering this repurpose, and we would get back to them. So, but those are the numbers that are there for that first project. We were going to be using the community development professional services for our the rest of this fiscal year that's outstanding. We have there almost $44,000. And Urban Renewal Agency funds are also potential, but council had kind of expressed a preference to use those community development professional services funds. A few alternatives. All of this, of course, at your discretion today. We could move forward with another workshop, depending on how your discussion today goes. We could reopen the task force advertising and or use the additional, the current 9 members to solicit some other folks for that task force. We could proceed with the current one using Sarah. Potentially, again, we would need to go back to them and get an updated quote. But in June, they are still available to assist the city with a facilitated process. We could proceed without Sarah or without another third party. We do have a caveat there that if we don't use a third party, that will involve some substantial staff resources, which would take us away from other projects, and we would need to tell you what those, what would have to get bumped in order to make this facilitation happen at staff level. Repurpose the task force on your direction today, or just sunset that altogether.
Thanks, Brad. Council, do you have any questions? Joel?
So, Brad, did you consider other community or other committee input, such as from the art committee and from the parking, in terms of potential alternatives? And maybe that comes under the 4th bullet you had on that, to enhance the downtown area. Because there has been some discussion on parking needs and on art downtown.
Right, we didn't really consider that for the task force itself, other than that bullet that says, you could go out and re-advertise and expand that task force. But you're definitely correct. Those committees have had the downtown plan as well as other discussions on their agendas, and this could be added to those.
So would you consider then that it would be a good integration of the different committees on the downtown area? So like the tree planting and the landscape architect plans coordinated with the art plan, is coordinated with the parking plan, is coordinated with the street plan. That task force would be charged with those recommendations of the different individual committees.
Oh, I definitely think that we could compile those recommendations and provide those to the task force, yes.
I have Valerie, then Brian, then Rick. Go ahead, Valerie.
We lost Valerie.
Maybe. I know it takes a second to unmute those phones. Is she on mute? *6 to unmute yourself, Valerie. All right, we'll move on to Brian. We can come back to Valerie in a minute.
Could you go back to slide 5? So on that last paragraph, it says, property owner informed the city that decision was made to retain ownership of the plaza with a focus on investing in current site infrastructure. I'm just looking for a little more clarity on that. Does that mean that the property owner is not interested in working with the city on that property at all? Or does that mean it's a reduced scope? Or that's not totally clear in my head what that means.
Do you want to take that, Aaron?
I think what it means is that it may, and it doesn't need to, but it may potentially not have as broad of a scope when you look at the recommendations. One of the things from a timing perspective is a property owner was at a crossroads where they needed to determine if they were going to be investing additional dollars in the current building and current site, and whether or not the city may be interested and what kind of partnership. The partnership is still there and the desire to work with the city is still there. However, there's going to be acknowledgement that now there's going to be money invested in the current site, whether it be parking lot improvements, new asphalt, new whatever it is, plus building building maintenance, which in the end is a little bit of a different scenario than maybe leaving it as is and then looking at a total redevelopment versus maybe redevelopment with the site as it is now. So.
Okay, so it sounds like he is proceeding as though the current structure will not be going away. Okay, so would there be any benefit to the task force using that as a scope for that site and continuing to have the focus be on that site? Or is that something to where the property owner could just work within current programs like in urban renewal, like building facade and things like that, that wouldn't necessitate a need for the task force?
I think that ultimately is a question that needs to be answered by council because all the options are still on the table. You could still look at a full redevelopment of that site. It just means the ultimate cost of either working with making that full redevelopment occur has just increased because there's been increases to building maintenance, there's been increases to site maintenance. So it doesn't mean that a total reconfiguration of the site doesn't exist. It just means the upfront cost may be going up with that.
Okay, that's a little more clear. And then I have one other question on the call to action slide. One of the options talks about proceeding with the task force without a third-party facilitator, and then you warned us that that's going to need staff resources, and you said that other things would need to get bumped in order for you to do that. So I'm wondering if you have a good idea at this point what those things are that would need to be bumped.
No, I think we would need to bring that back.
I think the key thing that wanted to bring in this slide to council's recognition is that right now both of our econ positions are vacant. This would be the position that would staff this if we did not have a third party. Without either one of those being filled, it's going to rely on Brad to actually be the one facilitating this task force. And I already know that Brad is already understaffed with the reduction of not having a principal planner and all the other council actions that are associated with park infrastructure. and other items that we're really needed to focus on, that the concern is if we go full speed on a task force at this time, that it's going to pull Brad from other tasks associated with council priorities. So for council to consider maybe prioritization of timing, is there an essence of time where this task force is needed now, or needed 2 months from now, or 6 months from now? If there is still that essence of time where it's needed now, that's fine. With council direction, we will move ahead. However, we might need to look at reprioritizing some of Brad's time associated with other projects that council desires to have done within the community development realm.
Okay, thank you. I think just for council clarity, it would be nice if it's not too difficult to get a picture of what would need to be set aside in order for this to happen.
Sure. The only other piece I might add to that, if I could, Mayor, is as you recall, Sarah is a design firm. They have a skill set related to, the design piece that we do not have in staff. So I think a lot of that comes down to the expectations of council, what product, what deliverable you want out of this. If it's a visioning exercise, if it's a long-term visioning exercise where you really are talking about at a very high level, here's the overall mix of uses that we're looking for, here's what we see maybe for, a plaza location. I mean, that kind of high-level discussion we could certainly facilitate that. If a deliverable that you would like to see out of this task force is, some conceptual drawings that can be taken to a developer, which is often how the process works in downtown redevelopment. You start with the visioning, you come up with some conceptual designs, and then you take those and put those into an RFP that then goes out to development community, and they can use that visualization to start giving some ideas for the partnership and what they want to put into it. So I think those are two kind of levels that you could be thinking about when you're in your discussion.
Rick?
Brian asked pretty much the questions I had, but in furthering, I don't know if we want discussion or more just questions at this point.
Still questions?
Thank you.
Joel?
Brad, is there a third option where the committee would meet first without the facilitator? Because any design, if it was to occur, would have to occur with coordination with the private landowner. And unless it was on some other area. And that task force would explore that. And if there's no need for that design criteria, then we could save the money and maybe instead hire either a contract facilitator or a contract note taker, and this isn't the right word, but it's the first word that comes to mind. I'd do it on the fly, so that we get the low-hanging fruit. One of the things was discussion, so I'll save that. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'd just kick it back to the council, because we could do that. I mean, we could do that low-hanging fruit sort of exercise, have that, I mean, if you want the committee to begin meeting, I think there is definitely something to be said for momentum, that once they begin, if we don't have a plan for how we're going to finish, maybe we shouldn't start the race, that idea, rather than just getting together and then talking and then having to delay. I think there's, that's just, to me, there's a lot to be said in these kinds of task forces for using the momentum and then just keeping that going on really regular meetings.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you have a question now, Rick? Go ahead.
So a little bit different perspective from Joel would be for us, if we decided or we're supportive of continuing with Sarah, are they available to, if we said, yes, go ahead, to continue with the process so that we could keep the momentum going? And I realize there's some different events going on here in that the owner has put the project on hold from that standpoint, but what would really be nice though is if we're able to go forward with the existing committee and get different ideas So in the future, whether it's 5 or 10 years from now, we have something on the board, because right now we have nothing, and I think just putting this committee together could be a real advantage. Is Sarah still available if we want them?
Yeah, they're still available, and I think if that's where you're gonna go, and with the direction that we're receiving now, it may be advantageous, if you still wanted to move forward with something like this, that you broaden the scope a little bit and not just have it as Caveman Plaza, but a full downtown redevelopment. What does that look like? So how does that link to the Owl Lot and the Fifth Street Plaza thing, and that we're talking about all these other items? And it's not solely focused just on one property, but it's focused on a general radius of maybe the central business district area. And so you would have that scope broadened, and I think that would potentially have a good representation of the current climate now with the property owners that are involved.
And could that be viewed as a kickstart for this whole thing, in just the mere fact we would start something instead of waiting? And that could be a real advantage.
I think however we do it, it'll be successful. I just think that we need to make sure that we're focused. If we're gonna, like Brad mentioned, we've noticed that with whether it be an advisory committee or a task force or whatever, once you initiate that momentum and that energy is there and it takes off. And we want to make sure that that's satisfying and rewarding for all parties involved. So if we're going to move forward with something, to have clear direction from council on the expectations on what this task force is to be focused on will help greatly if staff is moving forward with facilitating this in partnership or not in partnership with Sarah, based on what you ultimately want as an outcome. If it's considering the future development of the central business district, and you're focusing just on that, it can incorporate parking, it can incorporate lighting, it can incorporate Fifth Street Plaza, it can incorporate Caveman Plaza. And we would just want to make sure that recognizing all of those things, there's pieces that Sarah would be involved with, and there's pieces that Sarah wouldn't be involved with. And so we'd want to map out appropriately how we get to those pieces and when Sarah gets involved. And because there's a number of pieces that would be, hey, we need to review the parking task force recommendations from 2 years ago. We need to take a look at this. So there's one group, there's a lot of background information we could get to before Sarah comes on and starts helping us facilitate that also. However we do it, we'll be successful. We just need that clear direction from council on what your ultimate results that you're looking for will be.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Valerie, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I, sitting from the outside listening in, oh, this is probably not discussion and questions, but I am just going to ask what Joel said. We've had the tourism talk about it for years. We've had folks talk about it for years. We've had the tree committee talk about the plan that James Love gave us. Those have all been kind of floating out. We had this new idea come in about the change in the street design. One of the things that came out of one of our top goals was looking at the Redwood Towers, which is considered kind of part of our downtown. So I think that what I see happening is bringing the task force together, maybe putting a person from each one of those, the chair from each of the committees that we have currently together, and have a meeting as to how they can pull all of those things together and give Sarah some direction when Sarah comes down in June. But I hope that we move forward, just because I really feel in my 7 years on council, we've been talking about this and we've been spinning it around and around, and I say we move forward. And Sarah would be a great way to utilize their skills in design and help, since we do have a shortage of people on the city. Because, you know, I know Laura was way behind this. She was behind all this. So this has been going on for a long time. So I move we move forward with the task force. We get together the task force for a pre-meeting to kind of get their ideas together. We plan on using Sarah in June.
Okay, were you intending to make a motion there, Valerie?
Well, I did say that, but I don't know if it's the discussion part. If you want a motion, I'll make them.
I missed the last bit of what she said there. Can you repeat, Valerie?
Yes, if you want a motion, yes. We're in that stage of the discussion.
Okay, we were still in questions. I just wasn't sure if you, if that was your intention to make a motion then.
And I guess my question was, it's about,
Oh, you're cutting out.
can we put the chairs on committee, number one, and can we use that to look at Redwood Tower as urban renewal development? That's my question mark.
Okay, I think the answer would be yes, that the council could put the committee chairs on the task force. And then I heard that you're also interested in having the task force look at all these different elements of downtown planning, as including the Redwood Tower.
Yes.
Okay. I think unless you're really wanting us to vote on that right now, would you like us to continue with the discussion?
Yes, if other people have something to say.
Okay, thank you. I think DJ, I think we're done with questions probably, Brad. I think DJ also has something for discussion.
Yes, thank you. I believe that we should move forward with the creation of this task force. I think that there's still benefit in looking at the plaza directly right off the gate. With an urban renewal focus, given that there's willingness for a partnership, benefit to a partnership, and that's a key piece downtown. So city's involvement, contributing urban renewal dollars, and going in a direction of at least strategizing towards that property should still be the first thing that we do. I don't believe that it's necessary at this time, and nor did I believe when we had decided that an architect or consultant was necessary from the start. I envisioned this being as similar to PAVE, whereas committee and council gets together, establish its vision, and then hires a consultant to act as our client to perform. So I think it's unnecessary to have a consultant at this time. Sarah seems to be qualified, if we do decide to go in the direction of architecture, but that's to be determined, in my opinion, by the task force. I would encourage Jim Love to be a part of that conversation, to take his design and presentation, because I think that would be a valuable tool to spark ideas for that downtown plaza area. And then once that's done, I would be comfortable in either re-resolving the task force goal to specific different projects to keep them, focused on, council's direction. So I think that's going to help keep the vision manifested from the appropriate bodies, being council and the downtown people that we've decided to put on this task force. Furthermore, I don't really see a significant effort from staff at this point. I don't think at this point that you are going to need a director level qualification to be on this task force because it is so new. I think that pretty much any staff member could go there and understand what it is that council wants them to focus on. And furthermore, we have to understand that we haven't done any PAVE audits. We're not going to do any PAVE audits this year. So, the expected workload on that front is already reduced. So I'm in favor of creating the task force with the focus on the Plaza Center as determined, because there's still opportunity for that partnership. Thanks.
All right, Joel?
So I'm next. I just had 2 points. One, there's an additional committee, the Historical and Sites Committee, that has talked about downtown, and there's some low-hanging fruits as well as some other long-term visioning associated with that committee. Integration between the community the committees for the benefit of the community, I think is essential. And as we move forward, the other thing is, it's been tough. The last 2-3 years have been tough. They've been tough on businesses, they've been tough on individuals, they've been tough on families. The city has struggled, I think, a little bit to provide some positive projects for the citizens, and they deserve that. They don't have to be multi-million-dollar hotels or whatever, though, you know, if we can afford that and if that's what we want to do, but we need to have some things done that fit within the nature of the city and provide that hope for the future. That is a very important aspect, I think, of what leaders do. So for that aspect alone, I favor keeping the committee.
Vanessa?
I'm not certain if the council has access to different information than I do, but based on the correspondences from the property owner at the Caveman Plaza, it's pretty clear that that individual doesn't really have an interest in redeveloping that property with the city's assistance. It sounds like they would like to do that independently from the city. So I would like to retain the task force with a change in the scope. I see it being beneficial for that task force to assess all of the information out of downtown, all of the plans and proposals, and create some sort of a downtown master plan, an unofficial master plan of sorts. I'm not certain if Sarah Architect would be the appropriate firm for something like that, but I see this task force providing a vision for prioritizing those projects and helping us to organize them. I feel like the council consistently struggles with which should come before the other. So I think that perhaps that may be a better scope for this task force.
Brian?
So there's two pieces. There's the plaza and there's everything else. Vanessa makes a good point. It doesn't sound like the property owner wants or needs the city's help on that property and that he's moving forward. So I don't want to waste staff's time. I don't want to convene this group and use staff resources to work on something that it really sounds like the property owner doesn't want to be involved with. And I hate saying that because I think there's a lot of potential there. But just the data points that I'm seeing are saying that, you know, it would potentially be a waste of time for us to do that. As far as the everything else piece, you know, there's a slide that talks about the potential topics for a repurposed task force. Review the landscape architecture downtown plan. We've reviewed that. We just need to implement it. Evaluate the survey results for G Street reconfiguration. We've already done that. We might want a little bit more public input, but then that's something that we just need to decide whether we want to implement or not. Same thing with the Owl Lot Plaza project. Honestly, same thing with the Redwood Tower. That is not a redevelopment that is complicated. I mean, that project is either going to be a hotel or it's going to be dwellings. So it doesn't require a huge visioning or a huge task force to go through multiple meetings to decide these things. All of these different aspects are very straightforward and well within the wheelhouse of council to execute and staff. So I see a repurposing of the task force as kind of a waste of time and spinning our wheels and just pushing things out farther into the future and things just continuing to not get done. I appreciate the desire to not disband the task force because I think that those individuals have good intent and good energy and they care about our city and they care about our downtown. But at the same time, to me, it kind of seems like a waste of time. I think we should just be moving forward on all these things. We don't need to put together another task force to go over them all over again.
Valerie?
I would disagree. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You know, actually, I was going to say I agree with Brian in this because I do believe we need to move forward. But the best way to move forward is with the task force. It gives the momentum, they have momentum, bringing the community in to help us move forward in a positive way. Like Joel said, all of these things have been discussed. There are 2 members of the Historical Site Committee on this task force. So I say James Love needs to be there because we paid him to come up with this master plan. We the downtown people who are currently on it, their input, and you know we try to work with them and bring them together soon. And if indeed they would like the visualization, and the visualization can come through Sarah, because I agree with what Brian said. Since keeping this down the road, I remember this discussion on license 6 years ago at the plaza. So I would like to see the task force help us get this going, because we put it down for 6 months. So that's not kicking it down the road. That's saying, let's sit down and really talk about it. So that's what I would like to do. So at this point, if we want that motion that says the task force add a few people from committees and move forward, and have set up a meeting date to have them help us plan, then I would make that motion right now.
Are you making that motion?
Yes, I'm making that motion because I do believe, as said, I mean, Travis, he's doing what he needs to do right now, and that's just going to take too long. We've had this other discussion before him. We stopped everything because there was a possibility. Now he's made clear that he doesn't want us to hold up for him. So let's move forward. I think that's what he wants us to do as well.
Okay, we're having a little trouble hearing you, Valerie, so just to be clear, is your motion to keep the task force going with a downtown scope and continue working with Sarah Architects?
I would say yes, but I'm also open to making that be a decision of the board and the council down the road, after the task force comes back to us. So mine now is to just get the task immediately in the next month and then make a decision on Sarah with them.
Okay, so you want to get the task force going right away within the next month and then leave the decision about whether to use Sarah up to them?
Well, they can bring recommendations back to council. I recognize it.
Okay, they can bring it back to council. So that's your motion, is to get the task force going right away with a downtown scope?
Yes.
Okay. DJ seconded that. Discussion. Let's see, Kurt hasn't gone yet. Kurt, then Brian.
So I had a boss ask me once, do you think in probabilities or possibilities? And so I guess I would ask everybody here if they do that. We've heard from Travis, but we've never heard a grand plan as to what he wants to do with the plaza. We know of plans that he's had in the past, and those all went away. So I don't know that we can expect that he's got a grand plan to come up with. And we all know how important Caveman Plaza is to the city. It's a focal point. And so it's going to be key what gets developed there. So I would advocate strongly to keep the task force together and keep Sarah's involvement intact. I think we'd be doing him a huge favor because we'd be giving him possibilities. Then he can choose whether to invest in doing that. I mean, I'm not here to tell him what to do with that property, but it's important that we have a say in it. So, I mean, I would want to amend the motion to include Sarah, and we could broaden the scope, but I think it still has to be focal point on Caveman Plaza.
Rick?
So Kurt, I like what you've expressed. That my only hesitation is, I agree having Sarah or somebody like Sarah on board, And so if we're changing our focus, is Sarah the one we want to be using? I don't have a problem with that, because I really don't want to put the task upon staff. I want the committee and whoever the consultant is to handle it.
I would agree. I say go big or go home.
Brian?
So I like what Kurt had to say. You know, I like to think about the possibilities. But I also like to get things done, and I don't like to waste time. So I actually, if it's going to be hard for me to vote yes on this, because I don't know what staff is going to get pulled away from yet. You know, they are not able to tell us right now what needs to go on the back burner for this to happen. And so without knowing that piece, you know, what if it's something that's really important? You know, we don't know. So I can't vote yes when some unknown things are going to be backburnered that I don't know what they are yet. And so it just, that's hard for me to vote yes on.
But I'm saying keep Sarah involved, and then we don't have that staff trade-off. I think it's worth it to spend the money on Sarah. We're going to get a top to our project.
Even with an unwilling property owner?
You know, we can't control what we can't control, but it is very important to us what gets done there.
All right, guys, I mean, having spoken to the property owner a week or so ago and with his follow-up email, I think it was fairly clear that he's back basically asking us to, you know, stand down on discussing the future of the plaza. So I think there may be some merit in moving forward with downtown in general, and maybe incorporating touching on that, but it's somebody else's property. He was, you know, surprised, I guess, to learn that it became our priority last year, and has been caught off guard a couple of times by the council discussing this property when it's privately owned and it's not ours. So I guess I don't want us to get, you know, further down that road. If you're interested in pursuing the task force with the downtown scope, personally, I don't think that's necessary. I think that we know some things that we need to do, but it doesn't exactly hurt either. So that was the motion, is just to start the task force with the downtown scope. I think Valerie and several other people have indicated an interest in getting a couple other committee chairs potentially involved in that, but that was not part of the motion. And then just letting the committee decide whether they would like Sarah to be a part of it, and asking us for that in the future. So if you do not agree with that motion, go ahead and vote no, and we could do another motion. But this motion does not include Sarah. Is there any further discussion before we vote on that? Or are you pointing at Aaron? Okay.
I was just, and maybe this doesn't need to be discussed until the motion passed, but it may be helpful before the motion is voted on, is the downtown scope is very broad. I'm not quite sure what that is. And if we're going to be utilizing staff resources and focusing a great group of volunteers, we really need specifics. What do you mean by downtown scope? Do you mean you want to take a look at all the smaller plans that we have and incorporate them in for the review, like the parking one or the art one or the tree one? Have them look at those. Do you want them to look just at the central business district area, or have them define what downtown means? And where are there any boundaries associated with downtown scope? Because at the moment that the motion is relatively broad, and I just want to have success. And to have success, I think we need to have clear direction from council on exactly what you're needing information on to make an informed policy decision in the future.
Did you hear that, Valerie?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I will say, I know what I'm going back to is I know we have plans from James Love for downtown plans. It was paid for by the city. I know we have the results from the street design, the G Street, and we have survey results. I know we have discussed various, the parklets for that matter. We've also discussed so there's a lot of things we've discussed. In parking. So I just say we bring that together for a discussion, get the direction from that, and just have a staff member provide the things that have previously been done at the first meeting so that the discussion can start with what we already have in front of us.
Okay, did everybody hear that okay? All right. Is there any further discussion on this? Rick?
I hate to lose a committee, and I think a lot of the ideas could come out of the committee and might help give us direction where we're looking for what our scope is going to be, and maybe the committee would be a resource for that rather than for staff or for us coming up with it. Not saying we don't have the final say in what we do and where we want to go and say, okay, we don't want to go there, but I think the vision out of the committee could be valuable. Thank you.
I guess everything that I've heard, including the James Love downtown plan, the G Street plan, the parklets, the parking survey, I think at one point Valerie mentioned the 5th Street, those are all in the central business district and do not include any specific URA projects, including the hotel. Is that in line with what you were thinking, Valerie?
Well, if that's the place to start, because otherwise yeah, beginning, yes.
Okay, so we'll consider that to be the nature of the motion here, is to incorporate those pre-existing plans. All right, Brian?
Yeah, I just have to say one more time that, you know, we can task force and survey ourselves to death up here and not get anything accomplished, and we can hear from every single person in the city, but at some point we need to provide leadership, and we need to say, move forward on the downtown landscape architecture plan, move forward on G Street, move forward on the Owl Lot Plaza, move forward on a plan for Redwood Tower. We don't need a task force to do that for us. Like, we can do that. We don't need to wait another 6 or 9 months and not get anything done for a whole nother year to have the same exact information we're going to have now. So I'm going to be voting no because this is just slowing us down again.
Any further discussion?
Could you restate the motion just for clarity?
Yeah, it's a complicated sort of motion, but at this point, the motion is to create a task force that has a downtown, or to use this task force, I guess, to make a sort of downtown prioritization plan, and that we're asking them to look at all the documents and studies that have been gathered so far, including the James Love Downtown Master Plan, G Street reconfiguration and that survey, the parklets, the parking survey, the 5th Street Plaza, and I'm not sure if trees are in a separate thing, but we have some downtown trees thing too. That's part of James. Okay. So, and to not immediately hire Sarah for this summer, but to have the task force consider whether they think that is the direction we should go, and then they would have to bring it back to council to actually hire Sarah. So that is the nature of the motion. And Valerie, you made the motion, so I think we're ready to vote.
I vote yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Kurt?
No, Sarah, I'm going to say no.
Joel?
Yes.
Vanessa?
I don't know what's going to get put on the back burner, so I abstain.
Okay. We need to have a discussion about abstentions someday. Rick?
Yes.
And Brian?
No.
Okay, so it passes with a 4-3. All right. Any questions, Aaron, before we move on from that topic? No? Okay. We'll just reconfigure the task force there. I guess one question is, because that task force did not automatically include the chairs, do you guys does anybody want to make that an actual invitation for, what would it be, art and tourism, maybe? Trees?
Art, tourism, trees, even bike and ped potentially, CEDC. They all could play a role in providing input on a review of the downtown plans.
Joel?
So in group dynamics, you want a group from 5 to 9 people to be really effective and efficient. And if they need some outside resources and some folks from those other committees to talk about specific projects, they can call on them and coordinate with them directly. If you get too large a committee, it becomes very inefficient. And so 9 people have 72 relationships. If you have 15 people, it has 296 relationships. And so the workload associated with a larger group more than doubles or triples. So I would say we keep it down to the number that we got now, and if they need additional resources brought in or information, they can request that.
Okay, we'll just move on. Let's go back to land and buildings. Adam, are you still out there with us?
I am, and I'm sharing my screen. We might have to get Teams back pulled up on the main.
Okay, our tech guy Jason is coming up to get you back on the screen. Okay, we see the presentation now, Adam.
Wonderful. So thank you to Mayor and Council for your flexibility this morning, and also to staff keeping us rolling. Thank you very much for that. But finally, I am here to talk about, it's a bit of a continuation from our lands and buildings capital projects discussion from last week, but today focusing a little more on the Urban Renewal Agency and prioritization of those funds. The subject and summary will do a very quick review of the updates to the LB Capitals projects based on last week's discussion. Also, there was a question last week about Bancroft funding, so I've got a little explanation / example for that. I'll also show you a quick review of the Urban Renewal Plan as it is at the moment, and then go into discussion on some fiscal year 2023 budget options for the Urban Renewal Agency. And of course, the relationship to council goals is to provide cooperative shared leadership. For the updates to the land and buildings capital projects, both parking lot art and downtown alley activation and beautification were kept open and given an additional $15,000 of resources each. Fortunately, based on some of the projects that were closed, it looks like we'll be able to completely fund both of those contributions with funds already in the Land and Buildings Capital Projects Fund, as opposed to an additional transfer from the general fund. And so that second bullet point I've got there is just to show that at the moment they do have one more year of funding, but future resources, future ongoing resources are yet to be identified. In addition to that, I did go ahead and add some additional Bancroft flexibility to LB 6236, which is the Spalding Industrial Park development, just to follow along what we've done with that project and Bancroft funding in the past. So it's just got a little more flexibility. And then there were also some other projects that had questions specifically related to parks. I think you've already gotten at least one memo, but there's certainly some other detailed discussion that can be had at a later date. So these are the updates that we made based on last week's discussion. Going into Bancroft funding, there is quite a lot of details and many of the cities that I reviewed do things similarly, but also a little bit different and unique. So I put together an example I think that best demonstrates how Bancroft funding could work. So I'll just run through this real quick, and that usually a local improvement district or an LID is formed at the request or a petition of the property owners and then approved by the majority of the property owners in that area. A city can then use its own funds or some kind of internal borrowing or even external borrowing to complete improvements to streets or water, things like that. After the project is completed, the city then assesses the cost to the property owners within the LID, where they can either pay off that entire assessment all in one payment, or they can establish a payment plan to pay back that assessment over time. With that as collateral, the city can essentially refinance that and get its own funds back, but borrow funds based on the future revenues of those payments from the property owners. So that's kind of the process and how Bancroft funding would work. And if you need more information on that, we can certainly look deeper into it. Here is the Urban Renewal Agency plan, as last presented, I believe it was during strategic planning. The adopted plan, the original adopted plan, is in the right column, but then the amended column is in the middle. So it shows money has been allocated to the different potential URA eligible projects. This chart is the summary of all of the activity, essentially where all of the Urban Renewal Agency money has gone to date as of last Thursday when we pulled all of the which brings us then to the conversation on budgeting use of Urban Renewal Agency dollars in FY23. The chart at the top is showing let's see, I might have lost connection. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. The chart at the top is showing the budgeted items that will likely be necessary within the Urban Renewal Agency, including advertising, auditing, and consulting. Then there's some additional cost for city staff management, and I pulled out the economic development partly in this summary, just because that will be something new for FY23. And
I think we lost you, Adam.
I apologize, I've switched to network, so hopefully that will stop happening.
Okay, we heard you say Economic Development Manager.
Wonderful, then you didn't miss anything. Then finally, leaving about $10,000 of contingency, which is essentially to cover any advertising, auditing, or consulting costs for the next year. But after that, we would have around $3.5 million that the Urban Renewal Agency would be able to contribute to capital projects. And most specifically, as seen in the Urban Renewal Plan, it talks about being able to contribute 18% of the wastewater and water debt service. And it hasn't really included a number in the past, which I very much want to bring to your attention so that we can go ahead and start doing that. And the reason that there's a bit of urgency to that is because the Urban Renewal Agency only has 25 years left in its life to make those contributions, as opposed to the original 30 that it would have had. And of course, the fewer years left in the Urban Renewal Agency's life, the more per year the Urban Renewal Agency would have to contribute. So better to start now and also have that on our minds, as there is a lot of competition for those URA resources. So there are a couple of methods that we could that the Urban Renewal Agency could contribute to water and wastewater debt service over its remaining useful life. Now with wastewater, we know at this point exactly what the total debt service is. It's about $4.5 million. Another complication with wastewater debt service is that the debt service ends in FY38. So that's only 16 years from now, as opposed to the remaining 25 years of the urban renewal. So the URA contributions would really have to take place over the next 16 years. There's also the 18% of water debt service, which at this point there are a great many variables that could either there's more variables that could increase the debt service, but there's also some that could decrease it. So I'm using this $17.3 million estimate. That's what was last provided to council as it related to incorporating the URA's contributions for water debt service with the water rates. But as I said, that is still an unknown at this moment. But as you'll see here at the bottom, there are a couple of different methods are straight line contributions. I'm calling it escalating 3% contributions. And then I've got another option for water only, which we can talk about in a second. But essentially straight line is take the entire amount that can be contributed and divide it by the remaining contributing years, and you have the exact same amount being contributed from URA to wastewater or water debt every year. So that's this first section. The escalating at 3% method essentially just starts lower and ends higher. And that idea is based on trying to more closely match the revenues and the ability of the URA to be able to contribute those funds, as ideally the URA it's going to have a lot more revenue in 2047 than it does here in 2023. So that's the thought behind the escalating method. And then the final idea, which I'd say is likely most relevant for contributions to water debt service, is the idea of a large upfront contribution followed by smaller annual contributions, which could either be straight line or escalating contributions. And so in orange there, I put the $3.5 million, and that is because we look like we would have that available in FY23. Now, the reason that this one is specifically only for water is because a large upfront contribution from URA would allow the water treatment plant project to take out less debt. And there's a two-sided benefit to that, just as we spoke about in earlier discussions. If you can reduce the debt, you reduce the burden on the ratepayers. But because the URA can only contribute 18% of the total debt service, you also reduce the total burden on the URA. So a large upfront contribution benefits both the water ratepayers and the URA in the long run, but it has some short-term negative impacts on the URA in that it doesn't have as much flexibility to contribute to other projects.
Adam, I have a question. I'm not really familiar with this part of the wastewater water debt service funding, but the council has previously decided to pay a portion of the URA or the water treatment plant debt with the URA. Is that why this is?
That's correct. So the sewer plant and the water plant loans, the URA can contribute up to 18% of the debt service because the URA is about 18% of the city. So that's been in the plan for since inception, but it hasn't ever gotten a very good number or budgeted contributions based on that contribution, which is what I'm presenting today. Now, the discussion at the end of last year was the idea of contributing ARPA dollars and also incorporating the contribution of the Urban Renewal Agency, 18%, in order to reduce the impact on water ratepayers. So the URA is very much an enormous reason that we were able to provide the ratepayers some additional relief here on January 1st, 2022. And so now that was solidified, I'm here before you to show you the numbers of what that can look like. But of course, there are still some unknowns specifically related to the water treatment plant debt.
Okay, thank you.
looking into a little more detail on these options with a large upfront contribution and then smaller annual contributions that escalate 3% annually. The benefits being that it would reduce the total debt amount issued, which would save the water ratepayers, or in this example, and of course there are unknowns, but in this example, it would save the water ratepayers $4.7 million and would save the URA $1 million. And because of that large upfront contribution, then the annual contributions after that fact would be reduced. So it would give you a little more flexibility in later years for other projects. And with this escalating method, the URA would be most likely to be able to cover these annual contributions because the revenue for the URA should also be increasing, ideally about 3% every year, if not more based on project completions. But the URA revenue should also be increasing every year. So that's why this method is an escalating pattern of contributions. The negative associated with this type of plan is that it, of course, does make less available for projects in the short term. And you'll see why I've bolded less in a second. The other option being very similar, except that after the large initial contribution, it would be followed by straight line contributions. Many of the same benefits, except for that I would say that the savings to the water ratepayers would actually be a little bit more, and the savings to the URA would be a little bit more than the prior example. And that is because the more that is contributed by the URA up front, the lower we can get the total debt to be, which in the end saves money for both water ratepayers and the URA. However, this option, because it essentially has a larger 2024 and 2025 contribution than the escalating method, this makes the least available for other projects in the short term. So this option, I'd say, is more advantageous to the water ratepayers, and the previous example is more so in line with the increasing URA revenues.
Adam, Valerie has a question before you move on. Go ahead, Val.
I can't hear Councilor Lovelace if she's asking the question.
No, we can't hear her either. I was just giving her a minute to see if she's having a mute issue, or I don't know, is she able to chat?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can.
So the question was, this $2.5 million is that the $3 million of all. I just want clarification.
Did you follow, Adam?
I did not. You were cutting out pretty bad for me, Councilor Lovelace.
Okay. Did you hear me, Sarah?
I heard you say something about 3.5 million, but I'm not sure what the question was.
Is that different than the 3 from ARPA?
Yes, it is very much different from ARPA. It has similar benefits to ARPA in that the more funding we can contribute to the water treatment plant at the beginning, the less debt we will have, which in the end saves the water ratepayers more money, and it also saves the Urban Renewal Agency money in the long run. The trade-off is that the URA has less available now in the short term. But no, this $3.5 million is funds that the URA currently has available that are not specifically budgeted as allocations to any specific projects. However, I know based on that urban renewal plan and even the discussion this afternoon, there's certainly competition for these funds today, but I did want to present the option for your consideration.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, Joel has a question too. Go ahead, Joel.
Good presentation, as usual. It has a lot of math, which is okay, it needs to. So all alternatives have 18%, fund 18% of the water projects, correct? Regardless of which alternative you choose, you fulfill that 18% requirement.
That's correct. And at the moment for the water plant, we don't know exactly how much that will be. But yes, it's 18% of whatever the total debt service ends up being.
Okay, so the other thing is, given the state of our economy right now and what's going on with inflation, I would guess that it's going to go up. And this doesn't account for that, or yes or no?
I would say if you wanted an exact perfect dollar amount on the benefit of this plan, I couldn't give it to you because there are so many variables.
Sure.
However, in general, the more we contribute at the beginning, the less debt we have to take out, which saves both the water ratepayers and the URA money in the long run.
So it assumes then a 0% inflation for our future costs, and what we estimate the cost today, including inflation, is the cost on which these figures are based, correct?
I would say inflation would have an equal impact on all of the alternatives.
And I agree with that. Okay. So then the only difference between the alternatives then is when you pay the money. And if you pay the money up front, you save money in the long run because it's an investment, and you reduce your debt and you pay down your principal. And so the main difference then between the alternatives, both of them stay within 18%. Both of them pay down the principal when you have that large upfront contribution, and they save money in the long run. The annual contributions that escalate, there's less available for other projects in the short term. And then the difference with the straight line is there's the least available. So if we do the escalation, we have more money available earlier on in the urban renewal district. And in the straight line, we have less available in the near future for urban renewal. Did I understand that's the only difference between the two alternatives, which is important? Okay.
You stated it perfectly.
Okay, because we save the same amount of money for the ratepayers and the URA under both options.
I would say in the straight line method here, you're going to save a little bit more, and that is because if you look there in year 2023 and 2024 and 2025,
payments are higher. Okay.
Yeah, and because we'll likely be doing multiple steps of debt issuance, by having more money up front, we can reduce the amount that we issue in year 2024 and year 2025. So the straight line method gives the water ratepayers and the URA just a little bit more savings, but all of that will depend on the final debt service.
Okay, then if you could, Adam, then review very quickly the amount of urban renewal dollars that are available right now and what that upfront payment would be right now.
Based on where we're ending that's the slide, based on where we're ending fiscal year 2022, and based on budgeting for only these items you see on the screen there, which would be necessary costs for managing the urban renewal agency, that would leave us with $3.556 million. And that's why I put the 3.5 contribution. That still gives you a little bit of flexibility within the urban renewal agency, but does transfer pretty much the maximum benefit to the water ratepayers, and also benefits the urban renewal agency as well.
So then if I follow up on your logic, it spends the available urban renewal dollars, it invests them, it doesn't spend them. It invests them in the water treatment plant. And then any other urban renewal projects that were going to be funded at this point in time would have to be bonded.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, go ahead, Adam. think we're almost to the end here.
Yes, that was essentially the end, but the call to action is today, but at council's discretion, and I'll explain why in a second. The alternatives would be, is council interested in going ahead and starting budgeting for contributions to wastewater debt service with either method? And then most importantly, and I would say this is absolutely a requirement, is to go ahead and start budgeting for contributions to water debt service with one of the methods below. Now, I put an asterisk next to the escalating, and that is because that's essentially the bare minimum that the URA can do as far as contributing to water treatment debt service. One difference between what you see on the slide there and what you've got printed out is I did add one more line for the straight line option. Escalating is, again, more equally matched to urban renewal revenues, but the straight line methods are more beneficial to the to the water rate payers and to the URA in the long run, with the caveat being that it gives less flexibility in the short term. And with that, I can take any other questions.
Okay, can you explain again one more time what the difference is between including the wastewater debt service as well as the water?
So if council wanted to start contributing to both wastewater and water, get back to this slide, then this slide shows if you went with straight line, you'd be contributing to wastewater there in the green column. You'd also be contributing to water there in the blue column for a total annual contribution of $973,000. If you went with the escalating method and did both, then we'd start with 222 to wastewater, 474 to water, for a total of 696. If we went with the upfront contribution to water debt service, we would certainly have a lot less resources available in the urban renewal agency to also contribute to wastewater debt service. But between all of the options and given the changes or the adjustments that were made to the water rates there a little bit before the end of the year, we absolutely have to do the water contributions of 18%.
So it's not part of an existing plan to fund wastewater debt service this way?
At the moment, and Jason, please correct me if I misstate, but the wastewater rates are currently more capable of handling the existing debt service payments. Whereas the water treatment plant, there are a lot of variables and rising costs and rising interest rates. So this would help to offset whatever final rates are necessary.
That is correct, Adam.
On the wastewater, what this shows is if the longer we wait to start to pay for that 18%, the more it will ultimately be per year. So the sooner we start on allocating dollars to go towards that 18%, the cheaper it will be on an annual basis.
That's correct.
I guess I'm just still confused. What is the current plan for funding wastewater debt service?
So we haven't had a full, one of the key reasons why the Urban Renewal Agency was established in the spirit of the council when they did it at the time was the ability to pay 18% on the water and wastewater. That was a key discussion point that brought us to develop the Urban Renewal Agency. And so Adam has brought forward to you, now that the Urban Renewal Agency is in a position where it can start paying some of that debt, this plan today for you to see if we're ready to start budgeting for fiscal year 23 to start allocating those resources to those two items in the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay.
Did that explain it?
A little bit. So this option for water only would be leaving the wastewater debt service to be paid for through the utility bills.
Yes. That's correct.
Okay. Other questions? Rick, Brian?
As the urban renewal fund grows though, don't we still have the opportunity at a later time to fund wastewater?
You would have an opportunity later, but the
Right.
debt service for the wastewater debt ends in fiscal year 2038. So there's only 16 years left where the ratepayers are paying that debt service. So paying it at a later date doesn't really benefit them at the same time as the payments are being made.
Okay. I see also, I feel like we have a lot of irons in the fire and that we've already indicated we're willing to commit some ARPA money towards this. And there's some federal money coming down, state money, as well as other grants. So I'm wondering what this all plays into that. Would that just pick up the balance, or could it actually theoretically pick up the entire principal?
It certainly couldn't pick up the entire principal because it can only be 18% of the total debt service. Using the BRIC grant as an example, if we were fortunate enough to be awarded that, we would, of course, be in a position of needing to borrow much less. And with that, the 18% of the total debt service would also decrease quite a lot. So the URA's total contribution would only be 18% of the total debt service.
Now,
However, at the moment, oh, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
no, go ahead, you finish and I'll jump in.
I was just going to say that at the moment there are more reasons to expect higher interest rates than the one fantastic option that we have to really decrease the total debt service. And of course, we're trying very hard to work toward that goal. But this is a slightly more conservative and safer way to plan for increased interest rates and costs.
So what also I hear you saying, even if we decide to go forward today with this direction, we can adjust as we go. So then money could be brought back into the urban renewal if it's not needed.
Absolutely. As soon as we know what the total debt service is, we would then know what 18% of the total debt service is and would adjust accordingly. And if that went down, then everybody wins.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
So just 2 weeks ago, we talked about ARPA and we talked about the water treatment plant. And the conclusion we came to in that discussion was, let's wait until June until we hear the results of these grants. And I don't know why we wouldn't do the same here. It's only 2 months away. I don't know why this is coming to us before we know those results. I don't think that it is so pressing that we have to do this in the next 2 months. So I'm just confused why this is the urban renewal topic we're discussing today, when I was under the impression we were going to be having a more general urban renewal discussion and it wasn't going to be focused on water debt service. So I personally I'm not sure why we're talking about it today.
If I may, Councillor, my understanding of the conversation last week and then coming into this week would be to essentially take a first look at our budgeting options and budgeting strategy for FY23. And I showed last week that there were not any specific land and buildings capital projects that were being budgeted to receive any urban renewal dollars. And I stated at that time that certainly did not mean that there will not be a demand for urban renewal resources. Which is what this presentation is. And it's coming to you today specifically because of the budget timeline that we're going into. And on the call to action slide, as I put an asterisk next to the escalating 3%, the middle blue column here is what will be in the budget unless alternate direction is provided by council today, because that is the absolute minimum that is required based on our current knowns with the caveat that there are a lot of unknowns related to water treatment debt service, but that is what will be in the budget unless directed otherwise.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I also had another question. So with regards to the water rate increases, I just wanted to get clarity because the Urban Renewal Agency is paying 18% of the debt service for the water plant. Ratepayers that are inside the Urban Renewal District, they're also paying for the rate increases on their water bill. So is it correct that they're kind of paying twice on the water plant, where ratepayers outside the urban renewal are only paying once?
All the ratepayers would end up paying based on their usage and meter sizes for an equal or proportionate part of the water treatment plant. The Urban Renewal Agency would then be making up the remaining 18%.
Okay, so there's an additional burden in the Urban Renewal Agency on those tax lots that those outside do not pay.
If I could try to answer that in just a little bit different way, I think one way to look at it, the tax burden on those properties didn't change. So they were still going to be paying, and I'm just going to use really gross numbers, $100 in taxes. But when the Urban Renewal Agency was formed, that was frozen. And so then $20 of it went to the Urban Renewal Agency and $80 stayed with the original purpose, which is general fund support. Then of that $20, some of that then is allocated to pay for debt. So they're really not paying for it twice because their tax burden really didn't change. I think that's another way to look at it.
Okay, yeah, that's more clear. So they're not paying more. The city is just taking more of their tax money towards the water plant. Okay. Okay. And then Adam, do we owe $4.5 million on the wastewater debt service. Do you happen to know the interest rate that we pay on that?
There are multiple different borrowings, and I think the interest rates changed a little bit. The 4.48 is 18% of the total debt service. That's not the amount of unpaid principal and interest on the loans themselves.
That wasn't clear to me.
I think he was just trying to clarify that the 4.5 million is 18% of the total debt.
That's correct.
Okay, but what is the interest rate we're paying on that debt?
There's multiple different interest rates, and I don't have them available at the moment. I would have to look those up.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Joel, then Rick?
So Adam, to save the adjustment later on, what's the risk in not making or reducing the upfront contribution at this point in time to wait to see how many grants we get? What's the risk in doing that, if any?
Based on the timeline of when construction happens, we'd be spending other currently held resources as opposed to Urban Renewal Agency resources. Not making that contribution now would make more available for other projects, but it would also increase the annual contributions thereafter.
Could you repeat, increase the annual contributions thereafter? Could you clarify that?
Yeah, on the screen there, if you look at the second row, which is year 2 or 2024, if we don't have a large upfront increase, then the contribution in 2024 will be around $488,000 with the escalating plan. If we do a large upfront contribution followed by escalating, it decreases down to an annual contribution of $372,000. So the lower the upfront contribution, the higher the subsequent annual contributions will be.
And that's what you said under the effects under each alternative. Okay, thank you.
Rick, then Vanessa?
So Adam, when I'm looking at that chart and I look at the one on the right-hand side for 16.2, and then the straight line for almost 22 million, you have almost around a $6 million difference. I personally then would tend to favor the water-only approach, and I don't have a problem with committing the funds at this point, because as time goes on, we always have the option of changing things as we get new information. So is it inappropriate to use the word fiscally prudent to choose the one on the right-hand side? Or is that just a personal choice?
It depends on your priorities, but you're absolutely correct in that if you contribute to both wastewater and water, you have a lot less available for other projects. Whereas if you went with the water only, you have much more available for other competing projects. So it really depends on the Urban Renewal Agency Board's prioritization, which is why we're here today.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to provide clarification on that question too. So, Adam, if you can also clarify those three charts, straight line, escalating, and water only upfront then annual, is really stating that we need to budget straight line or escalating in wastewater. That's a given, but we're looking for council direction on, would you like it as a straight line or would you like it as an escalating? Then the third chart is not funding wastewater, but it's doing straight line or escalating with water only as an upfront, because there's no benefit of an upfront. There's not the type of benefit of the upfront with water as there is wastewater. So when the third chart is addressing just the water, and do you want to do an upfront as an option, where the other two are budgeting a wastewater at either straight line or escalating. Did that make sense? But not, if council chose and said direction, water only upfront then annual, then we would ask, would you like to do straight line or escalating? And let's say you say escalating or straight line, then we would be budgeting forward, unless we hear from you otherwise, we would be doing a straight line for wastewater and a straight line for water with an upfront. Does that make sense? So ultimately, direction that we're needing from council today is what we'd like to have, and if not today, then in the near future for fiscal year 23, is would you like straight line or escalating for wastewater? And would you like straight line and escalating for water? And in addition, would you like to do an upfront with the benefit of upfront dollars for water? So those are the three questions that we had for you today on this specific urban renewal one. Is that, Adam, correct? The three directions that we're needing from council?
That is correct.
And if we chose the water only, then it's automatic that wastewater chooses straight line or escalating.
Yeah, no, so the three questions. One is I think what works best for you in a water and a wastewater urban renewal agency contribution? Straight line or escalating? And then once that's determined, or whatever, the other aspect is, do you want to invigorate with an upfront cost of up to $3.5 million in water to benefit the water ratepayer and the urban renewal agency? Water ratepayer being $4.5 million, that $3 million nets a $4.5 million benefit for water rates, and it nets a $1 million benefit for the urban renewal agency if you invest 3.5 in the beginning. So those are the three questions. One question, the first two questions are likely going to be the same, I don't think it'd be likely that, I don't think it would be that you would say, let's do straight lane wastewater and let's do escalating water. You'll likely choose escalating or straight line for water and wastewater. Then the next question is, do you want to upfront 3.5 million? So I guess the two questions are, would you like escalating or straight line? And then would you like to do an initial investment of up to 3.5 for water?
Hang on, Joel, we have a whole line of questioning here. I think Vanessa was next, and then Brian, and then Joel.
Thank you, Adam, for translating this difficult topic. So I understand that under both scenarios, one of the cons is least available for other projects and the other is less available for other projects. It's my understanding that the Urban Renewal Agency can always borrow for projects, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In your opinion, would it be more advantageous for the URA to borrow for future projects with more of a cost savings lens today with that initial investment?
Straight line.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, of course. Do you think, in your opinion, would it be a better cost savings for the Urban Renewal Agency to move forward with the highest potential for cost savings today with an upfront initial investment and a straight line investment for wastewater and water, and then moving forward for other projects borrowing against the Urban Renewal Agency? Would that yield a higher cost savings?
I would say yes, and the reason why is because if the Urban Renewal Agency needed to borrow for some other project, an underwriter would look at the URA's commitments that it's made thus far, to which it would see that the URA is either committed to contributing $17.3 million to water, or it's only committed to $16.3 million to water. So overall, the Urban Renewal Agency would also, by saving money on the water treatment plant, would also have more available in the long run and through debt to be able to borrow for and construct other Urban Renewal Agency projects.
Thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get clarity on the savings. So like if you go forward one slide, just as an example, in the middle there it says, this option would save water ratepayers 4.7 and it would save urban renewal 1 million. So when you say saves water ratepayers, essentially it's a saving to the ratepayers, but it's not a savings to the city because we're paying the 3.5 million. So the city isn't seeing, I think Rick said earlier when he was looking at those charts, I think he said a savings of 6 million between those two options, but the wastewater wasn't included in that. So, that's 4.5 million. So the savings is really only like 1.5 million. So is that accurate that, it says saves water ratepayers 4.7 million because we're paying it with the URA, so it's not a savings to the city. Am I making sense?
I believe I understand the question, and essentially, the ratepayers are saving the 3.5 at least $1 million because of the contribution from the URA. But because the total debt is decreased, we're saving on a lot of interest as well, in which case the water ratepayers are saving the URA contribution and the interest, and then the URA is reducing the total debt and thereby reducing its 18% contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Adam, You're providing some clarity for me. I just had a couple quick questions. When I look at the comparison of escalating and straight line, whether it's water only or wastewater, it seems like those costs between escalating and straight line are fairly close. And it's the total amount being spent. But it ignores the value of time of payment. And so if I did the present net value of those payments, escalating would be far more economically beneficial because it would have a lower present net value of those costs. Am I saying that slow enough?
Yes, sir, and that's certainly why that option is there.
So
Escalating option is more
yeah.
fair to the URA.
So escalating is economically, by present net value comparison, is far and away preferable to straight line. And then the other thing that I heard you say, the 3.5 million, so then if we choose escalating, that would settle that based on the present net value being less in terms of our expense. And then the other decision point is the 3.5 million up front. Escalating also provides for additional urban renewal dollars early on, correct? Compared to straight line.
It does, yes.
So if we went with escalating and we went ahead and did the 3.5 million, we would still have dollars to spend in urban renewal, and more as you would talk about.
So you would have more available sooner, yes, sir.
So to me then, as an economist, I would look at making the payment of 3.5 million with escalating, and we would be economically ahead. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, and I did a lot of calculations trying to incorporate inflation. And of course, right now, it is very easy to consider high inflation, which greatly impacts future dollars. But if we look back historically over the last 20, 30 years, inflation has not been extremely impactful. It certainly has an impact over the long run, but it certainly isn't the same 6% that we're seeing today. Of course, I can't tell you what inflation is going to be in the long run, which is why the straight line method is it very well could turn out that was not the best economic decision, but it absolutely does provide a greater benefit to the water ratepayers today by decreasing the amount of debt that we issue.
I understand. Thank you.
Other questions? It's kind of a meaty topic here. DJ, you had a comment?
Yes, I do. Whereas I certainly appreciate all this information coming to light, I think that it is, there's a lot to digest here, and at least me as an individual, I would request some time to digest this and understand it in its entirety before we make a decision on it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Does anyone have other questions or discussion? Do you want to argue for one case or another at the moment? Brian?
Well, it sounds like the way they have the budget for this year coming up is they have the escalating in there as a placeholder until we make more of a final decision. I personally wouldn't be comfortable allocating 3.5 million to this until we know what we're getting back on the grants, because then we're, just gonna have to change it again. And I think I don't want to say we're a shoo-in for those grants, but I think we've got a really good chance. So, yeah, we do. So I don't think we should be committing that kind of chunk, when we, in a few months, should know the results of those grants. I think it's well within our purview to wait until we hear back on those and to just go with the escalating for this year as staff has as a placeholder in the budget.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Val.
I'm going to actually say the one thing I'm sure of is the million, and I thank for bringing this forward, because when we first went forward, it was one of the very first things we did when I was a counselor, and it was very controversial. And one of the major selling points that we used at that time is that we put 18% for treatment plant and the water plant. So those improvements can be made later if we do get the grant, which I do hope indeed that we are in the running. But I think the commitment that was made to the people of Grants Pass, that would be top priority. And so I believe strongly at this point that we need to upfront the 3.5. I was willing to go for escalating, simply because I think that gives us a little bit more upfront, but I think paying for that water treatment plant, the debt service, and the water we made to taxpayers, and I would vote that.
Valerie, you're cutting out pretty badly. I heard you again reference the 3.5 million. Did you say you would support putting that towards the water treatment plant right away?
Yes, it was a commitment we made when we put forward the Urban Renewal Agency that would be a big priority. So yes, I would support 3.5 going off of URA. Now that we know and have an idea, I think that yes, we should do that.
Okay. Vanessa.
I do support moving forward with the upfront investment for both water and wastewater. I think even in the best case scenario, if we do receive the full amount of that BRIC grant, we're still going to owe about $40 million on the water treatment plant. So I think moving forward on this would be wise, and that's what I support.
With upfront investment, do you mean the 3.5 million?
Yes, both for the water and wastewater with, thank you for asking for that clarification, also with the escalating option.
Okay. And Rick?
Mayor?
Yeah, Adam.
I just wanted to add a piece of clarification. The large upfront would be for water only, as an attempt to try and reduce the total debt service on the water treatment plant, whereas the wastewater plant, there's no reducing the debt service, the total debt service on the wastewater plant at this moment. But I think I certainly understood the spirit of your statement.
Thank you for that.
Rick?
I also support Vanessa's comments and feeling we should be moving forward. And with the upfront for water only and escalating for water and wastewater. And if the council's more comfortable, I would, making a decision next Monday, in other words, delaying it only 1 week to get additional information. And I guess on that spreadsheet, it would be interesting to see our wish list of how many grants could be coming in and other things potentially towards that, but realizing this decision still needs to be made now, and the sooner it's made, the better. Thank you.
Sorry, I was distracted for a moment there. I didn't catch what you were favoring doing, Rick.
Moving forward.
Moving forward with 3.5 million?
Yes, on the upfront for water only and escalating for water and wastewater.
Okay. Joel?
So I also favor the escalating because it has the lower PNV of the expenditures. And I'm okay with the $3.5 million if it's, and then adjust it if we get grants that would offset that. The other thing I would throw out there just to muddy up the water, instead of doing 3.5 now, we could do 2.5 now and see what the grants come in, and we could increase it at that point in time if we needed to. That muddies the water a little bit. And it probably doesn't make any difference because we're going to adjust it after we get the grants anyway.
Okay, well, we have kind of a mixed bag here. I know DJ had asked for some more time. Nobody really has a firm motion, but we have several people who are in favor of the 3.5 million option. Just keeping in mind, if you go that route, it limits your flexibility on the URA for other projects, and we would have to bond those out, right, if we wanted to move forward on something right away?
If it was a larger project that would require bonding, some of the smaller things, like some of the grant programs that we have may not require bonding, would have some flexibility for that, but for a large project, it would require bonding.
Okay, well, I'm seeing it's gonna leave about 56,000 in the hopper if we do that, so we would just be borrowing from ourselves or something, you're saying, for a smaller program? Adam?
There are some projects that already have urban renewal resources in them that are unspent at the moment. So there's that option as well.
Okay,
And ultimately, the number, the 3.556 million, is based off of estimated revenues. If there's any development in the URA, then revenues might end up being higher than what I've projected conservatively. So I tried to build in a little bit of wiggle room specifically for this purpose.
Kurt, did you have your hand up?
I would just rerun everything everybody else said as far as I would support the upfront 3.5 million and the escalating. These weren't vanity projects. We owe the money. Pay me now, pay me later. So I think we have to own up to our responsibility and pay.
Brian, then Joel.
And I'm okay voting now if we want to vote. I don't think we're going to learn too much more.
Joel?
Oh, just to move us ahead and decide on it, I would make a motion to go ahead and put the 3.5 million now in escalating with the water only because of the reducing the load, and then adjust the rate or the upfront money when we know how many grants we got.
Okay, second from Rick. Any discussion on that motion? All right, so Joel had a motion to move forward with the plan to put 3.5 million up front towards the water treatment plan, along with escalating in the future. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said about wastewater. Did you say something about wastewater?
Oh, that it's water only for the upfront.
Okay, did you have a plan for escalating the wastewater?
Yeah,
as
yes,
well?
yes.
Okay, escalating both water and wastewater.
And that gives us the most amount of flexibility for spending early on from urban renewal.
Okay, any discussion on that? I'm about to sneeze. Are you raising your hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, that option does not give us the maximum flexibility for spending urban renewal. The maximum flexibility is by not making the upfront payment.
Oh,
So,
you're right
to
there.
be clear.
If you make the upfront payment, it gives you you're right.
DJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say again briefly, and now and always, I do respect the direction of council and appreciate their understanding in this, but I'll be abstaining from this motion because I have a lack of information and understanding of the implications. So, thank you.
All right, further discussion? Okay, Joel, you made the motion. How do you vote?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Brian?
This discussion could have been had in July after we knew about the grants. I don't know why we're having it now. I'm voting no.
Kurt?
Yes.
DJ?
I'll abstain.
Valerie?
Yes, hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you. Motion passes 5-1. All right, anything further on that, Brian?
Yeah, I was wondering when we're going to have an actual URA discussion about the project list and about Caveman Pool and about the affordable housing and all the other things in urban renewal. I kind of thought that was going to be today, but it wasn't.
I also thought that was going to be more in line with what we're doing today, but
We can put that up on the screen. Adam has a slide that shows the funding and the projects, and we'd be more than happy to address any questions you may have.
I think in the interest of time today, I'd like to move on unless somebody has a specific question. Do you have a specific question?
I'm happy to move on, but are we going to come back in 3 months after we've all forgotten where we were in the first place? Or, I think I was hoping to have a discussion on the pool. It's on the list. We've been deferring that discussion, and I'd also like to have a discussion about the housing development program, as housing continues to be our #1 issue in the city, and it's part of this project list, and I think we should get that program developed.
Mayor?
Yeah.
If I may, Councilor De La Grange, those are really good, and I think it would be good to get additional direction on both of those items. I think when it comes to this discussion today, the only real discussion is not on the project details, but on, is that the proper allocation based on the full allocation of urban renewal that you feel is appropriate? Or do you feel as though, I think this year we need to sort of have the plan represent a larger dollar amount or something? Because currently right now, we're trying to keep as much flexibility for council as possible from a budget perspective and not setting aside certain dollars. But the specific housing projects or the specific pool project and that project itself, this may not be the appropriate forum for that. The appropriate forum would be to have an actual workshop to discuss that in more detail. This, in relation to those two projects, would be, are those allocations appropriate for where you see the future of those two programs? And if not, then let's talk about maybe reducing or changing or eliminating some of those projects, because there could be, if things change over time. And so that would be a great appropriate time, Mayor and Council, if you'd like, to talk about the allocation of those resources and if they're appropriate for your future plans.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to address the housing details. Maybe we can talk about that in an agenda setting because we have some housing stuff next week. But as far as the housing development program allocation of $3 million, I personally think that's really low given the scope of the issue and given the ability of the URA financially. We have a total of $50 million there. So I would advocate for some reallocation toward the housing development program. We still have $7 million sitting in that convention center line. I haven't necessarily figured out where reallocation should come from yet, but I would certainly advocate for the housing development program to be the allocation to increase, since it is our #1 problem in the city.
All right, yeah, we have the pool discussion coming up on April 18th, so I think that might be a time to talk about how to fund that if we're ready to move forward. And then as for housing development program, I think we need to have maybe a whole workshop at some point on what we're going to do there, because we don't actually have a program established, do we?
So that's sort of leading into our future discussion on April 4th when we talk about affordable housing program funding. And that'll make a good play on that. And that could be a great spot, Councilor De La Grange, where you say, and because we will mention urban renewal in that presentation, and that you can further provide us direction there. One of the keys, though, is the program is defined as an allowable expense. That's excellent. Council throughout the year could potentially change those allocations, and your plan. But the key is that it's in the plan and defined, and that's a big step.
Does that satisfy that, to have that discussion that's just next week?
Yep.
Okay, any other specific questions about this? I guess it's slide 5 before we move on for the day. No? Okay. Let's go just to agenda review then. So our next meeting is next Monday, and we have the Affordable Housing Program funding, as well as an ARPA discussion, and executive session to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. Does anybody have a question about next week's meeting or what you'd like to see come out of Affordable Housing Program or ARPA discussion? Brian?
I know that at the last Housing Committee meeting, they made a motion with regards to the ARPA funding, so I would like council to be at least made aware of that motion before we have the discussion.
That'll be mentioned in the presentation on Monday. They did, I think, make a recommendation to allocate or identify $4 million, I believe is the number of the ARPA for housing. So that'll be presented on Monday.
Okay. Then next Wednesday, we have a business meeting with a public hearing to consider an ordinance that would amend the Development Code Article 12 for minimum density standards. Council action item is a resolution for a water restoration digester heat exchange. Council action item regarding whether or not we're going to do parklets again in downtown this year. Council action item on the porta potties in Riverside Park and whether or not to continue those. Consent calendar has a resolution that would renew the Saturday Artisan Market lease agreement. Motion to approve the financial report for the quarter ending in December. A resolution to purchase a new combination jet vac truck. A resolution to enter into an agreement for the purchase of water treatment plant chemicals, sodium hypochlorite, aluminum sulfate, polyaluminum chloride, and a resolution to propose that would select an alley for the alley beautification project, and a resolution to put out a request for artists for the Beaver parking lot art, and a resolution that would terminate the COVID state of emergency. And then we would appoint one member to the Sustainability and Energy Action Task Force. Questions about any of that? Brian?
I had a question on next week's workshop about the executive session. Is council going to be made aware of the topic of that ahead of time?
I believe that's the contract, the grant.
Yes, so it's going to be a discussion about potential amount of ARPA funds to be used, and it will also delve into legal advice regarding consequences for the misuse or misappropriation of ARPA funds and how it will impact the contract as drafted.
Okay. And to be clear, we don't have a specific property we will be discussing in that executive session?
So you're going to be receiving this in the form of a confidential memorandum that will be protected by attorney-client privilege, because I'm giving you legal advice as to how the provisions of ARPA are going to affect the contract with that third party that we've been discussing.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions about next week? Okay, and then April 11th workshop, we need to discuss some of our downtown events and whether to continue those or how to do that with Art Along the Road, the holiday tree. Seems like we had one more even.
I think on the holiday tree, we were going to, it is in there. We were going to briefly discuss location or get input from council on that also.
Okay. Yep. Okay, and then buildable lands and annexation. All right, that gets us through the next 2 weeks. Is there anything that anybody would want added to this in the future? Joel?
So we had a discussion at our agenda setting meeting last week, and one of the things that we discussed was public funding or funding for public safety and survey. And do we want to send out a survey with the different options for funding public safety? And there was consensus that needed to be a discussion by the whole council. And so I would request that subject be put on the agenda.
Okay, we could have just put it on the agenda.
Well, we could have.
Okay.
I support that.
Go ahead, Val.
I support that as well. We needed a little bit of support behind it.
Okay. So I guess just the question was whether there's council support for doing a survey or discussing that at a workshop. Yes? Okay. We will get that on an agenda. Anything else? Brian?
On April 25th, there's the topic of Spalding Park Action Plan, and I was just hoping that maybe staff could send that plan out to council ahead of time so we can read that over.
Yeah, that's actually on my desk. We'll be getting that out this week.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything further? Okay, we do have an executive session scheduled for today, so is there a motion to adjourn into exec?
We get you out of here.
Vanessa?
I move to adjourn into executive session.
Second? Rick, thank you. All in favor of adjourning into executive session?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will move into executive session, and my paperwork is missing.